To indicate that I'm still a child at heart, I received a book detailing Japanese game obscurities for Christmas, and over the past week or so, I've had a blast reading about all sorts of weird titles that I had never heard of before. Eventually, I made it to the fighting game section and stumbled across Slap Happy Rhythm Busters. What a name. After reading through its description and analysing the pictures, I realised that I had never heard of it before. Even after all the time I spent playing obscure Japanese games in high school, Slap Happy Rhythm Busters never made an appearance on my radar, and at this point I knew I had to rectify this situation. Unlike most games I cover, where the average person has at least heard of its existence, this title is quite unknown, and I've personally never heard anyone tell me about it. Now, if you're familiar with my other videos, then you know that there's one thing in life that I love. No, not creating a video series and then forgetting to continue it, but a challenge. Join me, dear viewer, as we attempt to explore the circumstances leading to Slap Happy Rhythm Busters' creation, as well as getting lost in its battle mechanics and content. I may not be able to understand Japanese, but I know a cool game when I see one, and with how stylish the action appears to be, I'm excited to dive deep. This is the point in most of my videos where I would give you an elaborate discussion concerning how a specific game was made, but in the case of Slap Happy Rhythm Busters, there's next to no publicly available information. There are no official interviews, retrospectives, developer quotes, etc. to be found online, and I couldn't even find a basic Wikipedia page. Upon learning that the game was only released in Japan, I started to understand why this aura of mystery was surrounding its colourful box art, but that led me to ask an important question. Who exactly made Slap Happy Rhythm Busters? Founded in Roppongi, Tokyo, aka that place I can never find in Shin Megami Tensei 4, Polygon Magic is a hardworking yet relatively unknown development studio that has been creating software for nearly 3 decades. They've released countless titles over the years, but the only ones I've played are the first 2 Midnight Maximum tunes and the Wii port of Sega's Ghost Squad. From RPGs to survival horrors and even Silent Hill spin-offs, Polygon Magic has left their DNA across many genres, but they've always had a soft spot for fighters, with 1996's Fighters Impact being their first attempt at developing such a title. As far as I'm aware, there are numerous versions of this game, including an American pseudo-remake called Versus, but what's particularly relevant to us now is that both of them allowed Polygon Magic to experience what creating a fighting game was like. You may have been able to tell just by looking at it, but Slap Happy Rhythm Busters is heavily inspired by Japanese youth culture of the early 2000s. Its bright colours and, at the time, futuristic character designs scream Y2K, and I can't say I've seen similar presentation in the fighting genre before. I tried, believe me, I tried to find any credible source that explains why Polygon Magic decided to incorporate such a style into this title, but I unfortunately came up short. My speculation is that since the new millennium was such a big deal to society by way of its technological and cultural innovations, creatives around the world, but especially those in Japan, were jumping at the chance to introduce a fresh visual flavour into their works, even a few years after the 90s had ended. The World Ends With You, Jet Set Radio, Air Gear, Dead or Alive 2, and even Space Channel 5 Part 2 come to my mind as media that illustrates how effective this aesthetic can be when executed to perfection, with Slap Happy Rhythm Busters fitting right in. From what my research tells me, no other game in Polygon Magic's portfolio comes close to achieving this style, which is a bit of a shame. The heavy cel shading and vibrant colour schemes found within these 2.5-decade-old titles prevent them from aging visually, as despite their limited polygon counts and low-quality textures, they're still pure eye candy. Before we move on, I would also like to discuss the specific people behind Slap Happy Rhythm Busters. It would be overkill if I were to display every credited developer, but the most impactful ones were Masakatsu Yamaguchi and Masaru Yoshioka, the director and executive producer respectively. Both are credited on a mind-boggling number of works, including 2004's Rumble Roses, 2006's Blue Dragon, and 2023's Harvest Moon, The Winds of Anthos, just to name a few. If you've played a Japanese game from the past 15 to 20 or so years, there's a decent chance that someone who worked on Slap Happy Rhythm Busters also had a hand in that game's creation, and I had no idea that the Japanese developer rabbit hole ran this deep. Now that we have an understanding of how this game was created, how exactly does it play? Initially, I thought that Polygon Magic would have gone nuts when designing gameplay mechanics, but Slap Happy Rhythm Busters is actually quite simplistic. Unlike most 6-button fighters where there are 2 sets of 3 normals, these characters have 4 attacks, a throw, and a super. Their lack of medium attacks makes me think of Marvel vs. Capcom 2, as does the Universal Magic series. If you've ever played an anime fighter before, then you'll be familiar with the concept of freely stringing normals together in ascending order, and this concept is how basic combos are performed. Most characters I tested weren't able to deal major damage this way due to strict damage scaling, but it's still a fantastic feature to have, especially because it can lead to knockdowns. I don't want to harp on about Okizeme for too long, but I was surprised that a game this cheery had such a deadly pressure. Many characters have cross-ups out of short hops that hit super deep, and as you can't burst, failing to block an ambiguous strike can be the difference between victory and defeat. My favourite one is Mir's Heavy Punch, as it functions identically to Zero's Pizza Cutter in Marvel vs. Capcom 3. What is it with Japanese games and their multi-hitting attacks anyway? In addition to normals, fighters are equipped with launchers and wall bouncers. Both tools are obviously used for combos, but their unique ranges and frame data prevents them from being used identically. A larger fighter's wall bounce might result in extra damage, but its startup leaves them open for counterattacks, and I love the mind games this introduces. Special moves are up next, and as there are no more than 4 per character, they play into the game's straightforward nature. Most of these are performed with good old quarter circles, but a few characters utilize Mortal Kombat style inputs. I'm not sure why this is the case, but I assume it was to keep the game accessible for those new to the fighting genre. Hell, there aren't any DP or half circle motions either, so you'll only be doing quarter circle forward or back. Whether you want to zone, keep the opponent at mid-range, or throw out a wall bounce, special moves have plenty of variation to distinguish the roster, and like with many of the genre's offerings, they do a wonderful job of expressing personality without sacrificing utility. The only downside is that it doesn't seem possible to perform special moves after a heavy normal. I tried everything I could think of to get this to work, but I just wasn't able to, which was pretty weird, honestly. Fighters have numerous supers that cost 1 bar of meter, and as they also don't work after heavy normals, it's best to use them as punishment tools. On a clean hit, you can deal upwards of 40 to 50% damage, indicating that being left vulnerable for even small periods of time can come with huge ramifications, especially because some of these supers are unblockable. With how quickly players generate meter, you can expect to see multiple supers per round, but as none of them last for very long, I didn't mind this. Certain supers also have invincibility during startup, and I noticed this quite a bit during my playthroughs now that I think about it. I'm unsure if this applies to every super, but it happened enough for me to notice. Finally, when you have 3 bars of meter, which is associated with the number 8 for some reason, or maybe it's the letter B, you can press both heavy attacks to initiate a beat rush. This ties into the rhythm aspect of the title, as players must press one of 4 face buttons in accordance to the music. However, the victim can disrupt this process by pressing their attack buttons, meaning this interaction thankfully isn't one-sided. Successfully hitting notes determines how much damage you deal, so I hope you aren't tone deaf. The HUD's design and note animations reminds me a lot of walking into arcades as a kid and seeing all sorts of wacky rhythm games, and even though attacks like this can be found in more notable fighters, I can't help but love how it's depicted here. The entirety of Slap Happy Rhythm Busters could have been anchored around beat rushes, but I feel that this would have turned it into nothing more than a gimmick. Polygon Magic's decision to leave it as a powerful super that costs many bars of meter prevents this from occurring, thankfully, and I didn't find myself growing tired of it. You can easily play the game without ever using a beat rush if you don't want to interrupt the flow of gameplay too. While my thoughts about the title's gameplay are quite positive overall, I can't help but feel that there's something missing here. There isn't much that I haven't seen before in other fighters, and the lack of mechanics doesn't help either. I'm not saying that the developers should have just thrown in 1,000,000,001 different systems to make the game more complicated, but what it boils down to is that interactions between players don't leave much room for experimentation. If you get hit, you have no choice but to watch yourself be placed into a hard knockdown, and if you're the attacker, your available combo routes are limited due to a lack of special or super moves. There isn't much here to keep hardcore genre fanatics invested, and despite its killer sense of style, I found myself growing bored after an hour or so. On the other hand, the characters themselves are varied, and they remind me heavily of the colourful scoundrels in Capcom's Power Stone series. All sorts of colours, shapes, and proportions have been thrown together in a blender to generate the game's roster, and putting aside the battle system's lack of depth, I genuinely had heaps of fun analysing them all. A few of them aren't exactly original, but they make up for this with expressive animations. Slap Happy Rhythm Busters gameplay is clearly designed for newer fighting game fans, and I somewhat believe that it's a case of style over substance, but at the end of the day, winning a fight with symbiotic twins was quite the thrill, and with how colourful the whole package is, I can't be too mad. Contained within a menu screen that has more colour than most mid-2000s third-person shooters, Slap Happy Rhythm Busters modes are ready to go from the beginning, meaning we can jump right in. Arcade mode is standard fare, as it contains numerous fights before concluding with Stealth, the final boss. His appearance makes me think that he's the son of Blackheart and the Predator, but he's far less deadly than either creature. In fact, none of the CPU opponents are challenging, and I was able to finish arcade mode by repeatedly chaining Heavy Punch into Heavy Kick. They don't just stand there and do nothing, but the effort required to beat them is next to being non-existent. Like with Third Strike, you're given the choice of 2 opponents to battle for every stage, but frankly, this isn't enough to prevent the mode from being dull. There isn't anything here that hasn't been done before within the genre, and I just couldn't bring myself to unlock all the characters via repeated playthroughs. In my view, all the fighters function similarly enough on a base level for this unlocking quest to not be worth it. Versus mode is present too, and as I don't have anyone to play with, I can't test it out, but I don't think I'm missing out on any exclusive content here. There's also a training mode for players to mess around in, but it's remarkably bare bones. The pause menu text is barely legible, and there are only 2 options to play around with. Mind you, I wasn't expecting anything comparable to what we have today within the genre, but Slap Happy Rhythm Buster's contemporaries offered far more resources to players in their journey for improvement. Even the crappy PS1 ports of the old Marvel vs. Capcom games have more training content, and trust me, you don't want to lose a fight to this version of Marvel 1. Finally, there's a challenge mode designed specifically around beat rushes. After selecting your fighter, a series of notes will come flying at you, with the goal being to miss as few as possible. To be honest, I have no strong emotions towards this mode. Having to repeat these sequences over and over and over again for every character was mind-numbing, and I threw in the towel after a few successful attempts. Believe it or not, but that's all the content that the game has to offer. I can understand if this were an early 90s game developed by a studio with no genre experience, but Polygon Magic had already shipped 2 fighting games to market. If you can think of any fighting game released around 1998 to 2000, then you've definitely thought of a title with greater replay value. A great time for single-player fans? This is not, as you have to be all in on multiplayer to get the most out of Slap Happy Rhythm Busters. In my experience of browsing through its modes for this video, I was frequently at a loss for words and struggled to get anything meaningful out of its paltry offerings. Aside from its gameplay and retention issues, it would be criminal for me to ignore its presentation. I spoke about the Y2K-inspired style earlier, but when looking at the game holistically, this is definitely my favorite aspect. If you've ever clicked on those drum and bass or jungle compilation videos in your recommended tab on YouTube, then you'll definitely have an understanding of what Slap Happy Rhythm Busters sounds like. I wouldn't say that the soundtrack is as catchy as, say, Jet Set Radio or Ridge Racer Type 4, but its blend of Japanese crafted rhythms and thumping synths is certainly exciting. When scrutinizing the smallest of details, I found that everything on screen oozes with personality. Even the loading screens take the form of character-specific comic book panels. Its general color palette is nostalgic too, and I can't help but reminisce on all the old games I played as a kid when taking it in. If there was ever a Mount Rushmore of essential games to play for the Y2K experience, Slap Happy Rhythm Busters would need to be on there. Finally, eagle-eyed viewers will have noticed that there has been almost 0 Japanese text on screen. I've never known why some Japanese games have English text in their menus and on their box arts, but Polygon Magic followed this trend, and as a gaijin myself, this made things so much easier. I was able to instantly understand everything the game wanted to tell me, which gives it extra points in my book. Like with researching Slap Happy Rhythm Busters' development, gathering information about a potential legacy is nigh impossible. Aside from articles on sites like Hardcore Gaming 101 and TV Tropes, as well as some older YouTube videos, not many people have taken the time to commemorate this game. Its exclusivity to Japan is definitely the culprit though, but with that said, there do exist fighters that us Westerners appreciate despite never officially releasing here. Ending the story now would be quite anticlimactic, so I decided to put on my detective cap and go to work. During my search, I found that the PS3 and PSP received digital re-releases of the title. Allowing users to download select games from the days of old was a common practice back in the 2010s, one that still continues today actually, but some of these weren't on the Western PSN store. Yep, you guessed it, Slap Happy Rhythm Busters was once again kept away from those living outside of Japan. In the years after Polygon Magic released their 3rd fighting game, the only other brawler in their catalogue was 2006's Bleach Shattered Blade. With how diverse their portfolio is, and with their experience in fighting game development, I'm puzzled as to why the studio never threw their hat into the ring after Bleach. Perhaps they didn't have the staff or even the capital to invest into a new IP, with their output from 2010 onwards mostly focusing on Japanese mobile games. At this point, I jumped over to their website, and after seeing a logo that definitely wasn't copied from Amazon or anything, their list of support work popped up. Aha, this is what they've been doing. Looking past the infinite number of mobile games, Polygon Magic are credited on The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, Elden Ring, Armored Core, For Answer, and Sonic 06, just to name a few. Reading through their brief descriptions indicates that instead of tackling the bulk of development, they're brought in as a support studio to assist with character modeling and cutscene production, things like that. Surprisingly, they've become somewhat of a media giant outside of the games industry, boasting numerous stage plays and films in the achievements section of their website. Some of these weren't even created in Japan, leading me to believe that their influence has truly gone global. However, Slap Happy Rhythm Busters was developed during Polygon Magic's halcyon days, a time when the studio was still finding their footing and attempting to break into the mainstream, and as the world can be a cruel, cruel place, it doesn't surprise me to find that they don't acknowledge the game's existence in their list of titles. I searched high and low to find any mere crumb of information, but nothing turned up. I don't believe this is a result of the game's quality, or else, Sonic 06 wouldn't be here, but it's still interesting nonetheless. It's very rare for me to say this in my videos, but Slap Happy Rhythm Busters has nothing in the way of an impact, legacy, fanbase, etc., which is quite the shame. It certainly has enough charm to be appreciated by global audiences, and even though the fighting mechanics are simple, that shouldn't stop fans of Japanese media from jumping in and having a good time. Thanks to the power of emulation, and of course illegally dumping game discs, which is obviously how I played it, duh, it's easier than ever to experience the title in all its glory. Man, what a world we live in. To be real, I'm not sure if I'll ever play this again in single-player mode, as it doesn't possess enough engaging offerings to keep me invested over long periods. It's clearly been designed in such a way where the maximum fun factor can only be achieved when playing with others, so I would recommend checking it out with friends if you're ever in the mood for something obscure. I don't know how it took me this long to get around to Slap Happy Rhythm Busters, but at the end of the day, I'm glad that I got my hands on it. Some of my favourite games ever are bizarre works of art that could only be created by the Japanese, and although I wouldn't go as far as to say that this is one of the best fighters I've ever played, it definitely fits the bill about being certifiably Eastern. Never in my wildest dreams could I imagine a Western studio developing something that looks, sounds, and plays this way in tandem, so I have to give it up to Polygon Magic. They created something truly special, at least in terms of aesthetics. Okay, if you made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you and your time, and I hope you had fun. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.